Hello everybody! With the new Descent of Dragons expansion just a few days away, I thought I'd put out my own official card review. So let's get right into it. First, let me explain how I'm going to be rating these cards. So I'm not going to rate these cards by stars or tiers or anything like that. I'm just going to put them in several different categories. The first of which is competitive. And to me, that means the card will be in a tier 1, 2, or 3 deck fairly consistently. So that's my definition of a competitive card. And just below competitive, we have what I would call the fringe cards. These are cards that are sometimes in competitive decks, but alternate in and out of them. So still a good card, but not quite the cream of the crop of the competitive cards. So that's a fringe card. And then below the fringe cards, we have the garbage cards. These cards, you can call them pack filler, you can call them arena cards. These cards will not be in competitive decks consistently at all. So that is the definition of a garbage card. And then below the garbage cards, we have the tech cards. These are cards that are definitely only meta dependent if they'll ever see play. So there's only a few of these, but I thought they deserve their own separate category because they may be in competitive decks later down the line if we need to tech against something that's oppressive. And lastly, what I'm looking forward to the most, the meme and combo cards. So there aren't very many of them this expansion, but I'll try to highlight some and give you a few of my thoughts on some of the more special cards of the set. So let's get into it. All right, time for the last review. There's a lot of cards, so let's get started. First up, we have a 1 mana 2/2 Blazing Battle Mage. No text, no tribe, so it's just a 1 mana 2/2. We have seen a 1 mana 2/2 previously in Enchanted Raven, which was a druid card that actually saw quite a bit of play, although that did have the beast tag, which actually mattered quite a bit back then because there was a card called Mark of Yasharaj or Mark of Yasharj that buffed the Enchanted Raven. So you go turn 1 Enchanted Raven into the buff card on turn 2. So this card without the tribal tag is somewhat in a nebulous state. I think running this card really depends on the meta. It really depends how many premium 1 mana 1/3s there are with upside. Even so, I think this card makes it into a number of smaller token aggro decks, so I'm still going to give this card the competitive tag. Next up is a 1 mana 0/5 minion, Depth Charge. At the start of your turn, deal 5 damage to all minions. Just in case Doomsayer wasn't enough, right? Although one important point about Doomsayer is that aggro decks are so hyper-aggressive right now that it's not uncommon for your Doomsayer to actually die on turn 2. While Depth Charge is a great early game anti-aggro tool, it has little to no value in the late game. Because of the lack of value in the late game, I think this card will be fringe competitive. You may see it in some very, very heavy control decks that are teching against the aggro builds, but I don't think you're going to see it all the time, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does make it into one of those control decks. So fringe competitive for Depth Charge. Next up, we have a 1 mana 1/2 mech, Hot Air Balloon. At the start of your turn, gain +1 health. This is a rather unassuming card, but it actually has a lot going for it. I think this card will find its way into a variety of aggro mech decks. In fact, in a deck like Mech Hunter, they actually only run one 1-drop, and it's Mekaru. And while Mekaru is a very good card, I think this also finds its place alongside Mekaru in that Mech Hunter deck, just so you can steamroll from turn 1 until you win the game. I think this card may also find its way into an aggro Mech Paladin with the aid of Skycopter as well. I think one interesting question for this card is, does it fit in a combo priest, a Divine Spirit Inner Fire style deck? I'm not sure this card is quite strong enough to fit in that style of combo priest, but I still think it finds a home in several different aggro decks, especially Mech Hunter, so I'm going to give Hot Air Balloon a competitive tag as well. Next up, we have a 2 mana 2/3 Dragon Breeder, Battle Cry. Choose a friendly dragon, add a copy of it to your hand. Considering this card is a 2 mana 2/3, it has an unbelievably powerful effect. I think Dragon Breeder will find its way into a number of late game control, value-oriented dragon decks. But for my meme combo purposes, Dragon Breeder is also a fantastic card because it essentially acts as a very specific Zola. One idea I have for Dragon Breeder is that in a Galakrond Priest deck with Fate Weaver, essentially you can reduce your hand 4 times with double Fate Weaver and double Dragon Breeder. So there has to be some really cool combos you can do with a 4 mana reduction to your hand. So I'm looking forward to playing Dragon Breeder in a combo deck, but I think it also belongs in many control dragon decks, so definitely competitive for Dragon Breeder as well. Next up, we have a 2 mana 2/1 beast, Evasive Chimera. Poisonous, can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. This is another kind of unassuming card, but I could easily see this card making it into an aggressive beast-oriented hunter deck. However, I do still think that Mech Hunter will be the premier aggressive hunter deck. I think this card is fringe playable, but I don't think we're going to see it all that much, even though it's more powerful than it seems, so I'd probably still give it the garbage tier rating at this point. Next up, we have a 2-mana 3/2 minion, Grizzled Wizard. Battle Cry, swap hero powers with your opponent until next turn. This is actually a very interesting card because we're about to introduce a number of new hero powers into the game with all the Galakrond cards. Even so, I don't see Grizzled Wizard being played very much outside of a meme combo thief style deck. There are some potentially very cool combos you can do to disrupt your opponent, but I don't think we're going to be seeing him all that often, so I'd probably still give him the garbage tier rating, and the memes I don't think are that spicy with this one, so we'll see. Next up, we have a 2-mana 2/2 pirate, Parachute Brigand. After you play a pirate, summon this minion from your hand. Oh god, it's Patches 2.0, but now there's 2 of them. Oh jeez. Even though this card isn't quite as oppressive as Patches was summoned from your deck, and this has to be from your hand, so you have to draw this card first, it still goes in every Pirate Rogue, every Pirate Warrior, and may even find its way into other aggressive decks. So I think we'll be seeing Parachute Brigand a lot in those aggressive style decks, and it's definitely a competitive card. Next up, we have a very cute card. It's a 2-mana 2/2 Tasty Flyfish. Death Rattle, give a dragon in your hand +2/+2. This is a decently statted card for the effect that it grants you. I would say this card is still fringe competitive. I think we'll see it a little bit in the meta, but I don't think it's going to be in every single dragon deck, so for that reason, I would say fringe competitive. Next up, we have a 2-mana 2/3 minion, Transmogrifier. After you draw a card, transform it into a random legendary minion. I would say this card is definitely meme tier. I don't think this card is going to be really run in any competitive style decks. Although one important note for this card is pretty insane in Arena. But in terms of constructed decks, I don't think this quite makes the cut, so I think I'm just going to leave it at a meme tier card. Next up, we have another 2-mana 3/2 minion, Wyrmrest Purifier. Battle Cry. Transform all neutral cards in your deck into random cards from your class. While this card has some synergy with Pure Paladin, I don't think Pure Paladin is going to be a viable deck. I think Wyrmrest Purifier kind of falls into the same category as Transmogrifier, in that it's a great arena card, but it's not quite constructed viable. So for that reason, I would say it's almost meme tier, but I think it's just pretty much garbage tier. So not going to see much play. Arena, wow, good arena card. Although one side note for this card, I believe bombs like in Bomb Hunter or Hakar Corrupted Bloods count as neutral cards. This is potentially a tech card to get rid of those style cards from your deck, but I don't think that'll vault this into playability. So still garbage tier. All right, next up we have possibly one of my favorite cards from the set. It's a 3-mana 4/3 beast, Bad Luck Albatross. Death Rattle, shuffle 2 1/1 Albatross into your opponent's deck. I feel like this is another one of those unassuming cards, but this card is actually exceptionally powerful and a great meme card at that. I think this card has the potential to spawn another Weasel Tunneler type deck in Standard. Although I don't think it's quite as strong as Weasel Tunneler, it's still a great meme. This card actually has quite a powerful effect. On top of disrupting your opponent's draws, it also deactivates Highlander decks. And on top of that, it's decently statted and it has the Beast card. So I could see this card finding its way into a Highlander Hunter deck, specifically to disrupt another Highlander deck. While this card is somewhat meta-dependent if there are a lot of Highlander decks running around, I still think this is fringe competitive, and I do think we will see this in a competitive deck, namely Highlander Hunter. And outside of competitive deck, there's going to be a Bad Luck Albatross Priest in the same vein as Weasel Tunneler Priest, so I'm looking forward to that deck a lot. So, fringe competitive and a great meme card on top of it. Next up, we have a 3-mana 3/4 minion, Blowtorch Saboteur. Battle Cry, your opponent's next hero power costs 3. This card has decent stats, being a 3-mana 3/4, but the effect is not all that powerful, so I think this card falls kind of into the arena class of cards, where it's fine in arena, but won't see any play in constructed. So for that reason, garbage tier. Alright, next we have a 3-mana 3/4 beast, Dred Raven. Has +3 attack for each other Dred Raven you control. In Hunter specifically right now, because this card has the Beast tag, it's not all that difficult to reduce and copy beasts in your hand, either through Wild Tamer or through Hunting Party. So we make a couple of 0-mana Dred Ravens, combine them with Tundra Rhino, and we have an easy OTK. You'll definitely be seeing that deck on my channel shortly. Next up, we have a 3-mana 1/3 Elemental, Firehawk. Battle Cry, gain +1 attack for each card in your opponent's hand. We've seen similar cards to this in the past, and none of them have ever been constructed viable. This is a decent arena card, and that's probably about it. This card does have slight meme potential in a Shutterwalk deck to simply buff your Shutterwalk's attack, but I don't think it's going to see any constructed play, so for that reason, garbage tier. Next up, we have a 3-mana 3/3, Gobbleglide Tech. Battle Cry. If you control a mech, gain +1/+1 and rush. This is a very strong card, but I'm not sure it finds its way into a constructed deck. Although this card actually does compare favorably to a card that did see a lot of competitive play back in the day, and that's Tinkertown Technician, which was a 3/3 that gained +1/+1 and gave you a spare part. This card is basically the same, except it gives you rush, so more immediate board impact in that sense. I think the problem with this card is that most mech decks right now are fairly aggressive decks, and having rush in an aggressive deck doesn't matter all that much. Also, the fact that this card is not a mech itself limits the card greatly. I don't think this card is going to find a home in any of the aggressive mech style decks, and for that reason, I'm going to give it garbage tier, even though it actually is quite powerful. Next up, we have a 3-mana 3/4 elemental, Living Dragon Breath. Your minions can't be frozen. This is very much a tech card, but I'm not sure why you'd ever really need or want this card in your deck. So this card is only a tech card, but it's also, I would say, a garbage tier tech card. I think just about the only interesting question I have for this card is how does it interact with Cryostasis for Shaman? I think that's probably about its only use that I can think of. So I'll probably test that at some point, but I don't see this card seeing any constructed play. So tech card, but a garbage tech card at that. Alright, next we have a 3-mana 3/3, Scale Rider. Battle Cry. If you're holding a dragon, deal 2 damage. So this card compares somewhat to SI7 Agent or Fireplume Phoenix. And both of those cards actually saw some competitive play. SI7 Agent still sees competitive play, and Fireplume Phoenix wasn't all that bad of a card back in the day considering it costs 4 mana. However, I think the problem with this card is that it's not a dragon tribe itself. A card like Fireplume Phoenix actually had the elemental tag as well. While this card is decently powerful, I don't see it making its way into most dragon builds, so it's fringe competitive, but I'm leaning more towards garbage tier right now because I don't think we're going to see it all that often. Alright, next we have a Galakrond card. It's a 4-mana 2/2 Devoted Maniac. Rush. Battle Cry, Invoke Galakrond. While this card isn't especially powerful in its own right, I think it's going to find its way into every single Galakrond build because there's only so many cards that invoke Galakrond, and I think you have to run essentially all of them to get the full Galakrond value. However, it's worth noting that depending on which Galakrond deck you're running, this card is better or worse in different classes. Say for Rogue, for example, if you invoke Galakrond and get an Evolve Lackey into your hand, that combos very well with this card. So this card is absolutely competitive. We'll be seeing it a lot in Galakrond decks, but of course, it's underpowered. Alright, next up we have a 4-mana 4/4, Dragon Mob Poacher. Battle Cry. If your opponent controls a dragon, gain +4/+4 and rush. This is one of those cards that I can't believe Blizzard actually made. While this card is very much a tech card, I think it's going to be absolutely competitive in its upcoming meta. We're going to talk about some other tech cards in a second, but I just wanted to make one side note here that with this expansion specifically, Blizzard seems to have gone kind of off the deep end on their tech cards. Tech cards back in the day used to be like Blood Knight, where you would steal a Divine Shield and gain some attack and defense, right? But tech cards in this expansion seem to be trying to invalidate specific archetypes of decks, which I don't think is the correct way to make tech cards. Especially when a deck archetype like dragons is meant to go over many different classes right now. I think a card like Dragon Mob Poacher is ultimately unhealthy for the game of Hearthstone. But again, this is a very meta-dependent card, and if dragons aren't being ran in the meta, you're not going to see Dragon Mob Poacher either. Still, I hate that this card exists, and I hate that I'm going to have to run it in my deck. I think this card is extremely poorly designed. I really do not like this card. Even so, it's going to get the tech competitive tag because there has to be a viable dragon deck this expansion. So I hate this card, but it's competitive. Next up, we have a 4-mana 5/4 dragon, Evasive Faywing. Can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. This is a pretty vanilla dragon, but still a strong one at that. I believe Evasive Faywing will be a fringe competitive card, but it's just not very interesting. Faywing is just a dragon you throw in your deck just to make sure you have a dragon in hand so you can get that great dragon synergy. So this card will be in some competitive decks, but not all of them, so very fringe, I would say. Oh boy, we have a 4-mana 5/4 legendary, Frizz Kindle Roost. Battle Cry. Reduce the cost of dragons in your deck by 2. I don't care what kind of dragon deck you're running, this goes in it. Every single one. I think this is a card that everyone is going to be sick of seeing within like the first several days of the expansion. If this gets coined out on turn 3 or played on turn 4, your opponent's win rate is just going to skyrocket. It's almost unfair how good this card is and how powerful it is on turn 3 or 4. While I'm going to hate playing against this card, it also has great combo potential. I believe there will be a number of OTK decks that are made possible simply by having Frizz in your deck. So I'm excited for that, but I really don't like this card being in the game of Hearthstone. So definitely competitive, but I hate it. So there's that. Next up, we have a 4-mana 2/6 beast, Hippogriff, Rush, Taunt. I would say this is one of the first cards that we've seen that is absolutely pack filler. It's decent in Arena, it's never going to see constructed play, so for that reason it's a garbage tier card. Next up, we have a 4-mana 4/2 pirate, Horde Pillager, Battle Cry, equip one of your destroyed weapons. I would say this card finds its way into almost every single aggressive pirate build, whether it's Pirate Rogue or Pirate Warrior. I do hope that there's also some combo potential for this card. In Wild specifically, I think this card may find its way into a Valonir type deck. It'll be very interesting in that deck, but I hope that there's also some combo potential for Standard. I'll keep racking my brain on that one, but still, this is a very competitive card. Next up, we have a 4-mana 3/3, Troll Batrider, Battle Cry, deal 3 damage to a random enemy minion. I think this card is actually insanely powerful. This card is essentially Flanking Strike for Hunter. While the target being random does make this card slightly less reliable than a Flanking Strike, I still think this card finds its way into a competitive deck, namely Quest Shaman. In Quest Shaman, this card easily has the potential to kill 2 enemy minions and give you a 3/3 left over. So for that reason, I would still give this card the competitive tag, because I do think this makes the cut into a Quest Shaman build. Next we have a 4-mana 2/5, Wing Commander. Has 2+ attack for each dragon in your hand. I would say this card is another pack filler. Although it's reasonably powerful, the fact that it's not a dragon itself, I think limits the card potentially. So I would say garbage tier, pack filler, arena card. Next we have a 4-mana 3/9 Taunt, Zoldrak Ritualist Battlecry. Summon 3 random 1-cost minions for your opponent. We have seen a card similar to this in the past. I believe it was called Hungry Etten, and it was a 6-mana 4/10 taunt that summoned a random 2-drop for your opponent. Hungry Etten didn't see much play in Constructed, and I don't think Zoldrak will see much play either. I think the only place in Constructed Zoldrak could potentially find a place would be in Divine Spirit Inner Fire Priest. But the fact that this card has Taunt greatly limits it. So for that reason, I'm going to give it the garbage tier rating. Decent arena card, but won't see Constructed play. Next we have a 5-mana 5/5 dragon, Big Ol Welp, Battle Cry, draw a card. I think this card is easily competitive and finds its way into the majority of the best dragon decks in Descent of Dragons. Personally, I'm also excited for this card because when I make my combo decks, I often need a great deal of card draw, and this is another great option for me to cycle through my deck. So Big Ol Welp is definitely a competitive card, and it's also quite a nice combo card as it helps you cycle through your deck, so I'm excited for Big Ol Welp. Next up, we have a 5-mana 0/3 Chromatic Egg, Battle Cry, secretly discover a dragon to hatch into, Death Rattle, hatch. Chromatic Egg is a very cool card with a very cool effect. That being said, the card is probably too expensive and too random to see Constructed play, but it's a great meme card. I think this card will potentially be a lot of fun in a Death Rattle Rogue with Necreum Blade and Necreum Vial, but outside of that, I don't see this card seeing any play. So for that reason, garbage tier. Next up, we have a 5-mana 3/5 dragon, Cobalt Spellkin, Battle Cry, add 2 1-cost spells from your class to your hand. I think that this card is one of the stronger neutral dragons from this set, and finds itself in, I would say, almost all of the competitive dragon decks going forward. For the vast majority of classes, 1-drop spells are usually quite valuable. While 5 mana for a 3/5 stat line is a little expensive, I think the effect is undeniably powerful, and I believe this is absolutely a competitive card. Next up, we have a 5-mana 5/4, Faceless Corruptor, Rush, Battle Cry, transform one of your minions into a copy of this. I think this card is actually incredibly powerful. I believe that Faceless Corruptor will find itself in a number of token aggressive decks, and for that reason, I think it's absolutely a competitive card. I would say specifically Shaman and Paladin, as their hero power simply makes a token that you can transform into a Faceless Corruptor. While a minion having Rush in an aggressive deck isn't quite as important, I still believe this will make the cut. One side note for Faceless Corruptor is there's actually a very cool Shutterwalk combo you can pull off with him. Essentially, if you have a minion on the board and you play Shutterwalk, that first minion is going to transform into Shutterwalk. Then if you've played Barista or Bog Slosher or Baleful Banker or any number of shuffle cards or cards that bring minions back to your hand, it's a way to generate another Shutterwalk. So while this card is competitive in an aggressive style deck, I think it'd also be a very fun combo card in a very meme Shutterwalk build. So I'm looking forward to using it for that purpose, but still a competitive card. Next up, we have a 5-mana 4/4 pirate, Kobold Sticky Finger. Battle Cry, steal your opponent's weapon. This card, much like Dragon Mob Poacher, falls into the category of cards I never thought that Blizzard would actually print. While I don't think this card will see much constructed play this expansion, I think that the fact this card exists is BS. This is another tech card that completely invalidates archetypes, and that is wrong. If you thought Kingsbane Rogue was already dead, this is the final nail in the coffin for that deck. But this also invalidates an archetype like Spectral Cutlass Rogue as well. It'll also be interesting to see if this card completely replaces the Ooze style cards. I think in the vast majority of cases, stealing your opponent's weapon is better than destroying it. There are a few exceptions to this rule. Obviously, if you have a very nice weapon equipped, stealing your opponent's weapon may be a downgrade, but possibly the biggest downgrade for you would be stealing a Lunith from a Mage, and that could potentially fatigue you to death and kill you. But in Standard specifically, I don't think there's really a weapon you wouldn't mind stealing from your opponent rather than destroying it. So I think this card will replace Ooze in Standard for the time being. It's a very strong tech card, but again, I don't think it's going to see much play right now. So I would say right now in Standard, I would say this is more on the garbage side of a tech card. All right, speaking of tech cards that shouldn't exist, a 5-mana 5/5 Platebreaker Battle Cry, destroy your opponent's armor. Again, this is a card that I never thought that Blizzard would actually print. And once again, this is a tech card that again, single-handedly destroys an archetype. I think this card ensures that Control Warrior will never be the best deck in Hearthstone ever again. And that's messed up. I don't even like playing Control Warrior that much, but the fact that this card exists and invalidates that archetype from ever being the best deck in the game again is silly. In addition to destroying Warrior's control archetype, this card actually has a number of other uses as well. This card is also quite good against Wild Druid, as Druid has a number of ways to gain a lot of armor in Wild. This card also counters Theckle for Paladin. There will most certainly be highlights of Platebreaker setting a Paladin back down to 1 health after destroying all their armor after they Theckle. There will also be highlights of this card destroying all the armor a Druid gains from playing the Linecracker Earthen Scales combo. So there will be some great highlights from this card, but I don't like that this card exists. I don't believe this card is particularly useful in Standard at the moment. So for that reason, it's a tech card, and it's a garbage tier tech card at that right now. But the fact that this card exists is very upsetting to me personally. So, yeah. Next we have a 5-mana 4/5 Taunt, Shield of Galakrond, Battle Cry, Invoke Galakrond. There isn't really much to say about this card. It has decent stats, and it has Taunt, and it will be in every single Galakrond deck. So, definitely a competitive card. Next up, we have a 5-mana 3/3 Murloc, Skyfin. Battle Cry, if you're holding a dragon, summon 2 random Murlocs. I don't think this card finds its way into any competitive deck, so for that reason, garbage tier. Not much to say about this one. It's expensive for what it does too, and the effect is a little too random to see constructed play, so garbage. Next up, we have a very interesting card. It's a 5-mana 6/5 Tentacled Menace. Battle Cry, each player draws a card. Swap their costs. So mill decks are back! No, not really. I wish, but they're not back. I would say that this card is fringe competitive in very, very specific decks. Right now, I could easily see this card being placed in a big Paladin with the new Nozdormu card. That way, you're almost guaranteed to get a cheaper card when your opponent draws their card, and you'll be able to cheat out a rather large minion. While Tentacled Menace does fit in that style of big deck, I don't think you're going to be seeing him all that much, so I'd give him the fringe competitive rating. And hopefully Tentacled Menace will also serve as a great combo enabler for the style of decks that I like to play, as hopefully we can get a large discount on a combo piece and OTK the opponent from there. So I'm excited for Tentacled Menace, and I think we'll see it sparingly on the ladder, but enough to know that it exists. Next up, we have a 6-mana 6/6 mech, Camouflage Dirigible. Battle Cry, give your other mechs stealth until your next turn. I feel like this is one of those cards that's very difficult to assess. I wouldn't say this card belongs in a Mech Hunter deck, because I don't think that Mech Hunter needs this card to win. I would say this card may find its way into a Mech Paladin deck, but even that I'm a little bit skeptical of. Right now, I'd probably give this card the garbage tier rating, but I wouldn't be surprised if it pops up in several competitive decks as well. But I still think it's a little expensive for what it does, and aggressive decks don't typically need this effect to win the game. Although I do think this card also has some decent combo potential as well. Since we still have access to Galvanizer, we actually can reduce this card quite a bit. Hopefully we'll be able to find some use for this card in a nice combo deck, so I'm excited still for it. Next up, we have a 6-mana 5/3 Dragon, Evasive Worm, Divine Shield, Rush, can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So it's Ziliax, in dragon form. As with most of the neutral dragons in this set, I really wouldn't be surprised if it finds its way into a competitive dragon deck. This card provides a nice proactive answer to your opponent's board. I don't think that Evasive Worm will be in every competitive dragon deck, but I think it'll be in a great number of them. So for that reason, I'm still going to give it the fringe competitive rating, but I think it's just on the cusp of being considered a fully on competitive card. Next up, we have a 6 mana 4/5 mech, Gyrocopter, Rush, Wind Fury. We actually haven't seen that many Wind Fury cards printed in the last several expansions. I wouldn't say this card is going to find its place in a competitive deck though. Although there is some cool combo potential with this card, specifically with the Camouflage Dirigible. Ideally, you reduce both of those cards with Galvanizer and maybe get some Mega Wind Fury action on the following turn. So I'm looking forward to trying that style of deck, but I don't think Gyrocopter will find its way into a competitive deck, so for that reason, it's garbage tier. Next up, we have a 6 mana 6/6 legendary minion, Gronk's Dragonhoof. Battle Cry, draw Galakrond. If you've already Galakrond, unleash a Devastation. And let me show you what a Devastation is. Alright, these are the Devastations. Deal 5 damage to an enemy hero, restore 5 health to your hero, summon an 8/8 dragon with taunt, give your other minions +2/+2, and deal 5 damage to all other minions. So these Devastation cards are incredibly powerful. I think it goes without saying that Kronk's belongs in every single Galakrond build, and you're really doing a disservice to yourself if you're not running Kronk's. While Kronk's is a very powerful card, and borderline too powerful, I think it's a necessary card for Galakrond decks. When I theory crafted Galakrond decks, most of them to me were underpowered, but the fact that Kronks exist greatly elevates their power level. Even so, it's not a card I look forward to seeing before or after Galakrond's played. I would say especially after Galakrond's played. I think it's more powerful after you've already Galakrond. So, Kronks. He's a big boy. Oh, very competitive. Next up, we have a 6 mana 5/5, Utgard Grapple Sniper. Battle Cry, both players draw a card. If it's a dragon, summon it. While this is a very powerful effect, I'm not sure this is going to be a competitive card. The vast majority of dragons you want to put in your dragon deck are because they have a powerful effect and not because of the stats. So summoning the dragon in this way negates that powerful effect. While this card does have the ability to generate a great number of stats for 6 mana, I don't think this will find its way into most dragon decks. I would probably still give it the fringe competitive tag, but it's leaning towards garbage tier. I don't think it's reliable enough, and I don't think you'd really want to pull your dragons all that often to make this playable. There may be some small meme potential with this card, potentially if you shuffle a Malygos into your deck and specifically put out this card or something, but I think there's easier ways to cheat out big dragons than this card, and this is a little too random for most meme combos. So I would still say fringe, but leaning towards garbage for this one. Next up, we have a 7 mana 7/7 dragon, Evasive Draconid. Taunt. Can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. This card is very powerful and compares nicely to Sogoth the Slitherer, which was a former legendary minion that was a 9 mana 5/9 taunt with the same elusive ability. I would say that this card will be included in dragon decks more often than not, so for that reason I would give it the competitive tag. It's going to be a very annoying card to deal with. Next up, we have a 7 mana legendary minion, Shuma. 1/7. At the end of your turn, fill your boards with 1/1 tentacles. While this card has the ability to generate a lot of stats, I don't really see a deck where this card belongs. I don't think Shuma makes it into most token aggressive style decks because the vast majority of them don't need this high of a top end to win. I think the real problem with Shuma is that you can't buff the tentacles in any significant way, and you can't guarantee that they're going to be there on the board the following turn for you to attack. So I don't think an aggressive style deck needs Shuma to win. So for that reason, I'm going to give it the garbage tier rating. Next up, we have an 8 mana 4/10 dragon, Twin Tyrant. Battle Cry, deal 4 damage to 2 random enemy minions. It's a very nice effect, but it's also a very expensive card. I would say that Twin Tyrant is very fringe competitive. I don't think it'll be in the vast majority of dragon decks, but I think it will find its way into some of them, enough to know that it exists for sure. So for that reason, fringe competitive. Next up, we have a 9 mana 8/8 legendary dragon, Dragon Queen Alexstrasza. Battle Cry, if your deck has no duplicates, add 2 random dragons to your hand. They cost 0. I would say this is probably the most powerful dragon of the set. I think Dragon Queen Alexstrasza finds itself in a number of decks that has duplicates as well. It's that powerful. I think that Dragon Queen Alexstrasza goes in every single control late game deck because essentially you play it like you would a Zephyrs, where you wait until you have no duplicates and then you get the extreme value in the late game. For those late control style decks, Dragon Queen Alexstrasza also has another purpose. It'll be the dragon that stays in your hand until the very, very late game, and it'll activate all of your Dragon Synergy cards. So while I don't think you have to build a specifically singleton deck to run Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, it would help. While the effect is random in terms of what dragons you'll receive, most of the dragons from this set are very powerful cards, and getting them for 0 mana is almost game breaking. I think we'll be seeing Dragon Queen Albatross a lot this expansion. It's one of the most powerful cards from this set, and yikes, it's going to win some games for you. Very, very competitive. And lastly, a familiar face, 9 mana 5/5 demon, Sathrovar, Battlecry. Choose a friendly minion, add a copy of it to your hand, deck, and battlefield. So we've seen Sathrovar pop up in a number of competitive decks, most consistently in a Shirvala Holy Wrath Paladin. While Shirvala Holy Wrath Paladin probably won't be a premier deck this next expansion, I still think it'll be viable competitively. So for that reason, I would give Sathrovar a competitive tag. Also, if you've watched my YouTube videos, you know that Sathrovar has some great combo potential as well. The only unfortunate part about Sathrovar for combos is that he's so darn expensive. Even so, Sathrovar is a short Geppetto away from being a great combo card. So I'm looking forward to making more combos with Sathrovar going forward. So I believe Sathrovar will be competitive still in a Holy Wrath style Paladin, but it's also a great value card for a late game control style deck. So I think we'll be seeing Sathrovar in several competitive decks going forward. So definitely competitive. And that is all of the cards. I'm not going to go over all the cards one last time, but I will try to highlight some of the neutral cards that I think are sneaky powerful. The corridor creepers of the set, if you will. So the first one is definitely Bad Luck Albatross. It definitely seems like a meme card, but I think it's so much more than that, and I hope that it'll be actually in a competitive deck going forward, because that'd be very, very cool. I think another card that people are sleeping on a little bit is Faceless Corruptor. I think Faceless Corruptor will go in a number of aggressive decks, and it'll be quite the pain in those decks. So not looking forward to playing against Faceless Corruptor, but I am looking forward to that Shutterwalk combo I talked about earlier. So I think it's a sneaky powerful card. And the final card I'll talk about that I think is being underrated a little bit is Evasive Draconid. While Sogoth didn't see much competitive play, I think people are forgetting just how annoying that card was. And in many aspects, Evasive Draconid is better than Sogoth. So I think it's going to be a very annoying card to deal with going forward. And I think it's going to be a card we actually see more than people think. So those are the 3 cards I think are kind of the corridor creepers of the neutral cards, but I don't think they're quite on the level of corridor creeper, but you know. So that's it, guys. That's all the cards. So thank you for bearing with me with this incredibly long card review. I appreciate it. I look forward to continuing to play my meme and combo decks going forward, and I hope you'll continue to watch and enjoy those as well. So thank you guys so much.